Oke, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Namo Buddhaya, Om Swastiastu, Rahayu, and we back again with International Islamic Movement this week, presented by me, Muhammad Reza Zulfachryan Edmanda, one of the students within Mr. Siddiq Ahmadi's class. On today's meeting, we're going to talk about Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, or in other names, also called known as Islamic State of Iraq and Levant. There's a lot of variations of it, but one of the most major and one of the most popular would be ISIS, which is the continuations of the previous group presented by Aisha Dizaz Yanka that talks about Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda and ISIS is somewhat a bit of a intertwined within their historical background. And to get to know more, let's dive in into the materials. So first and foremost, in comprehending ISIS historical background, there are two things that we should know, which is one, the Middle East proxy war context, and two, the story as to how the organization emerged in the end of the day. In terms of the Middle East proxy war context, we must first comprehend that major context is that the key to comprehend everything that is happening within the war-torn region, because undeniably Libya, Yemen, and other countries, whether that be on the North Africa, whether that be on the Gulf countries, and even on the Persian ends, also face some level of distractions due to the fact that there are a lot of belligerent groups and political conflicts and whatnot, even if also undeniably within the Gulf area, such as Saudi Arabia, Oman, and whatnot, they also feel a certain level of development within the region. This happens because after the collapse of Ottoman Empire post-World War I, pre-existing groups and tribes within the region tries to rise for power. In the peninsula, the Al Saud, quote unquote, arise and being recognized as a sovereign state as they develop a kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They discover oil within the region, which in the end of the day only boost the economy and build its infrastructure, and they also forge alliances with the US as a trading partners. Meanwhile, on the Persian east end of the region, Iran, whom had a massive oil reserve and even bigger Muslim populations, also arise equally. However, due to the invasion from Russia and British, as well as foreign intervention from United States, such as the killing of Mossadegh, a popular prime minister with high electability, this only arbitrarily worsened the situation within the national level in Iran. Mossadegh are then replaced by the monarch, which is Reza Shah, and Reza aggressively, which is like my name, aggressively reformed Iran into a secular and modern and westernized state. Yet it was filled with strong corruption and authoritative public bullying by its secret police squad. This invokes Iranian Revolution, or in other words, Islamic Revolution, as the public have had enough of bad leadership and culturally unfit way of governing, replacing the Shah with Ayatollah Khomeini, who advocate for a clergy-led government. Under Ayatollah, tension arose between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Both groups had ranging differences, as Saud are predominantly Sunni and Iran are predominantly Shia. Yet the division does not merely revolve around this per se, because one of the main differences are not within the religions, considering both are still Islam anyway, but it exists between the government that these two countries are being supported from. A report by CIA showed that Iran started to bolster Shia's group to overthrow their current government as a means of exporting their revolution within the Middle East, specifically in Iran, Afghanistan, as well as Bahrain and Kuwait. This urged the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to exert their power by strengthening their alliances with US and form the Gulf Cooperation Council to counter Iran's revolution. In response to the ongoing tension between two major countries in the Middle East, Iraq, whom lies between Saudi Arabia and Iran, tried to invade Iran under the rule of Saddam Hussein in the 1980s. The war extended to 1988, and by then, as much as millions of lives has been taken. Yet, in shocking move on 2023, the United States in 2003, the United States invade Iraq and take down Saddam Hussein. This is uncalled for by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, nor Iran, as it ended up repercussioned into a civil war-filled Iraq. In lack of government, militia, and rebel group within the region flourish, all of which ISIS become one of those groups. With the lack of government that exists within Iraq in 1970s, the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan as a means to defend and install puppet dictators against rebels within the regions, right? And the rebels are filled by individuals across the region who call themselves Mujahideen, perceiving their struggle as a religious issue, many whom also develop an extremist view. Among rebel, there are two prominent individuals who played a major roles, which is one, Osama bin Laden, who came from a privileged background and is very well educated, which arise as the initiator or the founders of Al-Qaeda. Meanwhile, on the polar opposite end, but still within the same framework of ideologies of that extremism, lies Musab al-Zarqawi, who came from Jordan with a working class background, um, which in the end of the day developed ISIS. So Osama bin Laden, with his privileged background, developed Al-Qaeda, and Musab al-Zarqawi developed ISIS, which is more like grassroots, you may say. After the withdrawal from Soviet in 1989, both Osama and Abu Musab went back to their own region, and Zarqawi tried to form its own group to extend the fight for Islam throughout 1990s, yet it didn't achieve as many succeed when compared to Osama bin Laden's, whom led Al-Qaeda as the world shines spotlight in response to its move in September 11, 2001, on Twin Tower. Both Zarqawi and Laden decide to move back to Afghanistan, whom are ruled by the Taliban, to exert more bargaining power. Yet, as United States invade Afghanistan, Musab al-Zarqawi then flee abroad to Saddam Hussein, whom is killed by the US. The Sunni insurgency arise alongside the jihadist movement, which are led by Zarqawi. Zarqawi's group developed rapidly and employed a quite brutal tactic in its action, focusing its killing on Shia, which started the Sunni-Shia war. By 2004, Zarqawi rise even higher as Al-Qaeda, who are losing relevance back to allied with Zarqawi by initiating Al-Qaeda in Iraq, or AQI, Aki. However, as Sunni Muslims are tired with atrocities conducted by Zarqawi, the movement arise and in the end of the day counterback to Aki with the help of US, whom successfully killed Zarqawi. Be that as it may, after the ongoing Arab Spring in 2011, Aki are then reformed into ISIS, which is the Islamic State of Iraq that we know today and is led by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Now, we're going to talk about the ideology, what is ISIS and what the followers believe. Muslim throughout Middle East, Europe, North Africa, and Southeast Asia, and even other regions flock to participate in the fight and join ISIS as they glorified the notion of pre-apocalyptic holy war. These people are then nurtured by ISIS through their ideological ties, and if we put into an ideological taxonomy as defined by Dick Majian in 1988, ISIS could be categorized as messianistic primitivists, as they favor and fantasize over the world to come as per what is written in the theology of Islam. The whole world will unite as one ummah, and Islam will be the only religion. Everything that is not in linear to their definitions of Islam will then perish and shall be destructed. As a group and a movement, ISIS could be classified as Salafi jihadist group. Yet, as a state, it could be classified as a theocracy. It follows the teachings of Salafi of Ibn Taymiyyah, yet it seeks to change and reform traditional Salafi interpretations and the four Sunni schools of law. It also seeks several inspiration from the Muslim Brotherhood, who is initiated by Said Qutb, a radical Egyptian Muslim theologist. These are due to the fact that Abu Omar al-Baghdadi, which is the leader of ISIS, are heavily influenced by Muslim Brotherhood throughout his youth in exploring ideologies, just like what we see on social justice warriors seeing Karl Marx and glorifying communism. Next, let's see the goals and the strategy in achieving that goals implemented by ISIS. We're going to talk about recruitment tactics, weapon, battlefields, and social superstructure. First and foremost, the goal of ISIS is to establish a Sunni Islamic State led by a group of religious authorities under supreme leader of the Caliphate, whom is believed as the direct predecessors of Prophet Muhammad. In order to prove this legitimacy, they even announced that their leader, al-Baghdadi, have a trace of lineage with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And In achieving that goal, there are four strategies implemented within each of these aspects. One, recruitment tactics. It harnesses the power of social media, especially Twitter, as a means to convey message and a vessel of influence. It tracks down sympathizer, who most of them are youngster, alienated and outcasted by the society. It also tracks newly converting Muslim from Catholic, Christian, and Jew background because um, these people that just newly converted usually have nowhere to seek actualizations and validation because they are new to the community, but at the same time they are being shunned away by their old community, which is like the Catholics and the religions to which they coming from. As a barrier of participation alleviated by digital platform, it allows these young individuals to connect with ISIS through social media. ISIS also able to exert its campaign by creating a video production showcasing the atrocities committed by its enemy, who most of them are Western government, which validates their saga and military approach. Second, within the battlefield, it employs reactive contract drill. They initiate contact with enemy by giving the first shot with a small numbers of squad, and the scout will then act as a decoy as they recenter the attention of its enemy to their bait. After which, a bigger group with more weapon will start to shoot the distracted enemy through the other side. However, they start to shift the tactic by inviting more local to be their decoy as a means to alleviate its enemy audacity in doing a counterattack in fear of shooting innocent civilians. In terms of weapon, they utilize both conventional and unconventional weapons because they stole the weapons from Saddam Hussein storage during the Iraq insurgencies and weapon from robberies that they took out in other belligerent groups. And last but not least, in terms of social superstructure, they maintain a social superstructure through strategies beyond the battlefield. They focuses on various aspects such as education, economy, and family affairs, but implement a sense of Islamic teaching, which are validated by al-Baghdadi. Um, they encourage women to play a supportive role, the basic patriarchal household, nuclear family. Women should support their husband in caring for soldiers, nursing, cooking, and domestic chores so that their husband could go out, practices, and become a soldier. They also relies on criminal activities including robbery, kidnapping for ransoms, and unjustified taxation on controlled properties in order to gain more economy, and they receive donations from stakeholders, some supporting anonymously or being deceived by the framing of humanitarian aid. So they frame that their situation, their living conditions as very pretty bad, and they tries to persuade their Western counterparts to give donation, even if in the end of the day it goes back to the military. And next up, we're gonna talk about prominent figures. Abu this, Abu that, Abu yang mana, because there's a lot of Abu within ISIS. However, comparatively to other Islamic groups in ISIS is practically new, right? There's only one prominent leaders or one prominent actors that I could find the informations of, and is official and legitimated. Although there are a lot, they install a new religion since the current Abus is that, obviously, on 2014, but the information is not being sent out to the public yet, as per my research. So, here comes Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Baghdadi, the self-proclaimed caliph and leader of ISIS, falls into the leadership typology of mujahidis. Within the context of Islamic movement, he maintained secrecy and extended the organization's influence and attracted foreign recruits for terrorist acts while rarely appearing in public. Baghdadi had deputy commanders, a cabinet of advisors, and local emirs overseeing operations in Iraq and Syria. But little is known about the figures truly representing him as a legitimate ambassador because comparatively to um, comparatively to Osama bin Laden, who have a pretty much privileged background and have his whole youth being documented by his family, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi did not necessarily have that privilege. They don't necessarily have a lot of camera and documentations of younger Baghdadis, so we don't really know much about him. And he's practically passed away now, so there's little to no biograph being written about him. Now, in terms of programs and activities, it's quite self-explanatory. ISIS avoided authorized political activity to build an independent state. So they have not yet mingled with the international government. They did not necessarily apply to international humanitarian law. And other things that sovereign state or legitimate state being recognized under the UN did. So they declared themselves as a state, but they did not necessarily do the obligation of a state should be. They established a governmental structures and provided quote unquote public services in controlled regions of Iraq and Syria, but the services are not a service because it's just a protection. And who are they protecting? Well, of course, from themselves. Um, Lastly, the government's institutions crumbled after losing control of territories to the international coalitions. I have some critical notes, but to make it easier to comprehend, I wrote it in some simple point. One, ISIS struggles to maintain relevance and bargaining power after the death of Baghdadi, meaning that they realize too much power to their own sole leader, and they did not necessarily distribute that bargaining of power to other non-leadership roles, which is why they don't necessarily have a sustainable base. Second, they faces attacks from foreign-based military aggression, and they did not necessarily have the strategy to counter them. Third, they have overliance of to Baghdadi's governing tactics and centralized authoritative power proves detrimental as there is no succession plan. They, not to mention Baghdadi, oftentimes arbitrarily have an extreme interpretations, lacking a strong basis in shaping comprehension to Baghdadi's interest when it comes to theology. So it's not necessarily right in terms of fiqh, but so long that it is in linear to what Baghdadi want, then it's gonna be what Baghdadi gets. Last but not least, they have a very, very, very narrow and intolerant outlook, which contradict the initial goals and invokes an oxymoronic, counterintuitive approach in the social global sphere. What do I mean by this? Here's the thing: the reason as to why ISIS exists was because they want to unite ummah from a different parts of the world, right? Which is multicultural, already multicultural within itself. Islam within itself is very diverse. It applies in many different culture which don't necessarily have a lot of middle ground to begin with. We have Arabs, we have Asians, we have African, um, the Westerns even and whatnot. And the only reason to unite that Ummah is to create an inclusive teachings. But in this case, instead of going to that heterogeneous directions, they choose to murder the diversity. Shall there be any question? You may reach me. I'll leave my contact there. My name is Rezha from Edmanda. You could see me from IG, or you could ask when in class, or you could also put your questions on the forum. I'm pretty sure that Kak Sheila is gonna help me with that, and I'm gonna answer it one by one. Thank you for your kind attention, and I hope that this video is informative.